Okay. You guys are all drinking from the fire hose of information, so we'll just keep pumping you guys full of good stuff. So anyway, I'll get the second half of this rangeland talk, and excited to talk about a new tool that you guys have now at your disposal for grazed rangelands. It's been in the works since 2012. We've been looking at this, doing trials, and it's finally here. We got the grazing, which is super exciting. And again, I just want to provide some insight, provide some information for you guys. And there's my contact information on there. And if you have questions after the talk or whatever, feel free to call me at any time, and we can talk through it. But I'm going to set the stage, start off by talking about kind of our success and where we're kind of as you guys as applicators, as land managers, like what is your ultimate goal on a site? Because I think that's really important to setting those sites correctly in terms of your management objectives and priorities. So, in what you see in this photo in terms of treatment success, is your success based off of a year? Is it based off of multiple years? A lot of the work that we've been doing with CSU and other universities is really showing the importance of depleting the seed bank of invasive grasses and our noxious weeds as well. So if we don't get that seed bank depletion, then we're really not getting ahead of the game, and it's really difficult in terms of management. So I'm going to talk about how this new Rejuva tool gives you that opportunity to deplete the seed bank of your target weeds. And then when you look at invasive grasses, they're a huge issue, like Claire talked about, but also the broadleaf weeds. And again, seed bank is as important as noxious weeds as it is invasive grasses. And we can set our sights on depleting the seed bank, and I'll talk about what those sites can look like in terms of different species. When you look at invasive grasses, and really the issue with invasive grasses is they increase fire frequency, and we'll go through some of that information. And once one or two fires goes through a site, it becomes and transitions, like you see here, complete monocultures, which I'm sure all you guys are familiar with. If it's an overgrazed area, if you get a wildfire, we really need to preserve those natives that we got underneath the soil, or else we're just going to end up with these sites like this, and these wildfires are going to continue to rage here in the West. And I actually did a little bit of Googling this morning and found that this year alone, there's been 38,000 wildfires in just 2020. And it's kind of amazing. And I live in Greeley, and it was crazy this last weekend. I'm sure you guys saw the plumes of smoke, and there was ash falling all over the place. And it's just, that's the way, that it's not going to be different next year and the year after. And we need to preserve and really protect the areas that we can restore now, that while we still have the chance, because seedgrass, even in small amounts, can increase the likelihood of that burn by 4 times and the frequency of those fires. And it carries through a system like you see in that shrub, where it's a very hot fire. If a fire goes through there, and it's going to completely wipe out your system. So what can we do about it? That's really where we're at, and what I'll talk about. And when you talk about these invasive grasses, you guys manage all different types of sites, right? You have cheatgrass. We don't have Ventonata medusa head, but it's knocking on our door. I guarantee there's probably some populations over in your area. They just haven't been identified, because they have these in Utah, Wyoming, Montana. And what's scary about these two is they have basically no grazing value. So cattle can graze cheatgrass for a few weeks in the spring. They just completely avoid Ventonata and medusa head. So they're really scary. Keep an eye out for those two species. We have bulbous bluegrass. That's another one that I'm getting a ton of calls on, which we're seeing some good luck in control of that. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then joint goat grass. So it's not just one invasive grass that's doing this. It's a multitude of these. And then at the same time, you guys are trying to target noxious broadleaf weeds, and you have your Dalmatians, your Mullins, your thistles, and all these different aspects, and they're constantly adding seed into that soil seed bank. We need to think past just that initial control of that burn down, and how do we get ahead of the game on these noxious weeds? Because in so many cases, and in my experience and talking with folks, by the second year after treatment, so many sites get reinfested via the seed bank, and it's almost if you didn't do anything. So we really need to gain ground, and that's really what I've been so excited and passionate about, working with some of these new tools the past 5, 6, 7 years. And like I mentioned, why does chemical control often fail? And it's not that it's not effective out of the gate. There's so many products that work fantastic out of the gate. You get nearly 100% control. And we've done trial after trial and working with so many different land managers where plateau, you get great control the first year, and then it's just so highly water soluble that by the second year, there's no herbicide left in the soil, and that seed bank just rears back, and you're basically back to non-treated levels. And the same with products like, broadleaf mixes, Tordon, Milestone, Telar, you know, if you go out with just those mixes, they're very water soluble. Where the first year it looked fantastic, but then you get all those plants coming back via rosettes, seedlings, the following few years, and then you're back to the same area that you were. So we got to gain ground, and through that is seed bank and longevity, and just setting our sights on that long-term success that we need. And like I said, you know, you guys manage sites like this, right? You got common mullein, you got musk thistle, you got cheatgrass, all in one. And you can imagine those are setting seed year after year. And you may not have seen this site for 10 years. So it's been setting that many seeds over that long a period. And that's why if you're purely just, you know, using water soluble type chemistries, that seed bank is so prolific, and you can get initial control, but it just comes back via that seed. And it's very important to target that. And like you guys are aware, invasive grasses are top of mind right now, and we now have this tool, and I'll introduce that here in a second, to fight back. And we have folks like Charlie Clemens in Nevada. We have Sage Grouse projects. Jake Corkamp in the bottom left was doing work in Sublette County. He's a PhD student at CSU. And up in Sheridan County, like Claire was talking about, they're targeting Medusa head and ventonata, 2 EDRR species, which are knocking at our door. And the reason why they're so top of mind is that they are having such huge landscape scale impact. Like when I talk through some of this, show some photos, it's just amazing to me how much cheatgrass can suck out of the system, and invasive grasses. It's really like a parasite, where if you're able to eliminate that cheatgrass, it's like fertilizing your range. You can really see some positive things come back. So, and the key right now is we got to target areas where we have native plant communities that are still intact, because like that picture showed in Nevada, if it's the worst of the worst, most highly degraded sites, there is very little likelihood that there is anything left under that system. So if you treat those, it's just going to be bare ground. So what we got to do is target these sites where we have some type of remnant desirable plant community. And in a lot of cases in Colorado in particular, there are a lot of cases where there's so many natives that are still intact, and they're waiting for 1-2 wildfires and they're not going to be there. So that's what we got to really get ahead of them and start targeting those now, targeting that seed bank. Some of you guys, if you've seen my talks, this is kind of a standard slide that I throw in there just to show the seed bank life. This was work we did at CSU when I was over there. And what we found is that, you know, for a long time, you know, a lot of land managers and folks doing cheatgrass work were just going on a year-by-year basis. And it was hard to get to that level of how far do I need to manage? How do I talk to my customers about, you know, what their ultimate goal is? Because their ultimate goal is they want to get rid of the weed, right? And they're going to be pissed off if they come back and, you know, if by the second year, it's the same issue that they had originally. They're going to call you up, right? So to have that mindset, it may take 2 applications over that 5 years, but we can get to that point where this shows if you can manage cheatgrass and deplete the seed bank, you can do that in about 4 to 5 years. And so what we need is treatments that can get us that longevity. And there's multiple approaches. You know, that's up to you guys. And really where a lot of the cost comes is you can go with those water soluble mixes, but you got to treat every year. You got to treat 4 years in a row. Application costs just go up out of the roof in terms of doing that many treatments. So what's cool about the Rejuvra that I'll introduce to you is we're getting multiple years control, 3-4 years with one treatment, which is pretty amazing to see. And this idea, just think about this in terms of the weeds you try to manage. Like this is the same for kochia, seed bank life of around 3 years. If you can manage that period, you can really gain ground. If you're looking at mullein, some of those seeds are a lot longer lived, but we can still get to a point where we can have some really good success over the long term. Okay, so now introducing Rejuvra. Like I said, this has been since 2012. We've been working at CSU, originated at CSU and then spread to the West, but super excited. We got the full grazing label in June of this year. It's now available, so you can purchase it in 2.5-gallon containers. We'll have quarts next year, but it's super exciting opportunity. It was currently been used under the trade name Esplanade. And in terms of those labels, just so you guys are aware, so Esplanade 200 SC used to have open space, natural areas, rights of way, and bare ground. We're now launching this new Rejuvra product that's going to be for specifically the open space, natural areas, and rangeland markets. And so this will be purely with a full grazing 0-day restriction. So all that labeling that was on Esplanade for open space, natural areas is getting moved to this new Rejuvra product. So Esplanade 200 SC is going to be your right-of-way labeling, your bare ground labeling, And even though it is a bare ground right-of-way product, it also will have a full grazing label, which is also really nice to have. But yeah, this is the new product. It'll be called Rejuvra, and it is now available, which is awesome. In terms of the work that we've done, you guys, if you've seen some of my talks, I've talked about the research and whatnot. And we started at CSU, and we saw some great luck in the greenhouse. We started doing field trials. We saw some great results. But again, it was like, okay, it could work in one geography, one soil type, one moisture type. So that's why we did trials. We have over 130 replicated, all universities, really showing consistency and control across all the invasive annual grasses in these different regions, which is pretty cool when you talk about different moistures and different soil types and whatnot. And that's really consistency is where we're at. And this is what this tool provides in terms of that and longevity. Where can you use it? Like I said, any rangeland site, anything graze, 0-day grazing restriction. I don't know how happy I am to be able to say that now, because Esplanade, it was like, no, you can't graze ever, basically. So now we have a full grazing, 0-day restriction. Now you got that opportunity to utilize this tool on those sites. It'll still maintain the natural areas labeling, so you'll be able to use it parks and open space, wildlife areas, fire rehab, fire breaks, prairies, things like that. So there's a lot of utility here and flexibility in the labeling for these types of sites. In terms of how this product works, it's very unique, and we talked, you know, in terms of longevity and what I was talking about in terms of multiple years control. That's what we're seeing. If you look at this depiction, so the herbicide binds a lot to soil organic matter and soil particles, and it stays in the top 1 to 2 centimeters of soil, and it's a root inhibitor. So as those new seedlings, whether it's a cheatgrass, whether it's a common mullein seedling, whether it's a kochia seedling, as they start to germinate from that layer, they control those seeds. But as those deep perennial plants, like you see in that photo, they have roots below that herbicide zone, so they're unaffected by the herbicide. And you can see on the right-hand side what that looks like. You know, how do you take out a selective treatment and take out cheatgrass from native perennial plants? That's exactly what we're doing with Rejuvra. It just controls in that topsoil profile those new seedlings that are germinating. And when you look at this product, it's actually used in citrus and grapes and tree nut crops in California. It's called Allion. And kind of like what Rick was saying, it's used in a different market, but it's the same exact general idea. It's using a perennial crop, citrus and grapes, and we're controlling all the annual weeds on top of that. In our system, it's perennial grasslands where we have shrubs, perennial grasses, forbs, and that's what we're seeing with this tool. And in terms of native species tolerance, this just shows you, we dug up a bunch of native plants and we've done a lot of native studies and tolerance work showing that 3, 5, 7 ounces of the product is really safe on a lot of our desirable native perennial plants. And the highest labeled rate for graze sites will be 5 ounces, but if you're non-graze, you can go up to 7 ounces on this tool. We've only really seen one injury from one species. It'd be the fescue, Idaho fescue we saw up in Montana. And it was a short-term injury for about a year, and then it grew out of that. So that's just some species to monitor if you have that, which I don't think we have any of that in Montezuma County. But in terms of the standard grasses and needle and thread, western wheatgrass, all those, it's looking fantastic. In terms of when to go out, and this was something that Claire talked about in her talk, you know, in terms of timing, it's really hard to know when this wheatgrass is going to germinate, when go grass is going to germinate. It all depends on the weather, the year, and it can be really difficult to identify exactly when that's going to occur. But that's the nice thing about Rejuvra is you can actually get it out 1 to 2 months before you think it's going to germinate. And it's unlike a lot of chemistries, it actually is really photostable, so it won't degrade by sunlight. It'll sit out there. If you apply in June, July, it'll sit out there for a good month and a half without any rain. And then once those rains occur, it'll incorporate and activate that herbicide into the soil before cheatgrass germinates. But if you're going out in August, September, October, kind of the time frame we're in now, you can get what we call the white phase, where cheatgrass, you see the roots in that image, it actually can grow below ground without even seeing it above ground. And if that occurs and you go with just Rejuvra, we're not going to control those plants the first year because they've already started to grow. But when we mix it with Plateau, that seems to do a fantastic job. I've done a lot of work with 5 ounces of Rejuvra plus 5 ounces of Plateau. And you go August, September, October with that mix, and it is so consistent. It's fantastic. So I would highly recommend, if you're going out this time of year, add Plateau to the mix at 5 to 7 ounces per acre. If you're on sand, you only need about 4 ounces of Plateau. And then if you're in dormant season, like that blue shows, you can actually add a low rate of glyphosate, 8 ounces, and that'll provide control of those wheatgrass seedlings. and then Rejuvera will give you that long-term 3 to 4 years control with one treatment. And this is really kind of getting to what I was talking about earlier in the talk in terms of longevity. And this is what you see. This is a demo we put out, and this is 3 years after. And you see the untreated in the middle, the Rejuvera on both sides, and then in the plateau treatment. And what we've seen is the plateau looked great the first year, but then it just reinfested the second and third year, and you're back to the same exact level. So we didn't gain ground, right, on those weeds. In terms of Rejuvera, look at the lines on that. It's pretty cool to see that in terms of the 3 years after and how sharp those lines are in those areas. This is a study. This actually averaged over 3 studies, 2 in Colorado, 1 in Utah. I think it's good to see over multiple locations in terms of how the products work. But this is the only graph I'm going to show you. The Rejuvera are in light blue, and the dark blue is plateau, matrix, rimsulfuron, and glyphosate. And 3 years after treatment, this is what we see. We see anything with Rejuvera had a really high level of control. Anything without Rejuvera that was water soluble, it didn't provide us any longevity, and we were back to the same untreated levels. And that's the idea behind that. It's just highly water soluble. We didn't get to that seed bank depletion with the water solubility of those other tools. Where Rejuvera, it was locked in that top soil, and it gave us a high level of control. And what we're seeing is it may take a follow-up treatment that 3rd or 4th year to completely eliminate that seed bank. But that's something to monitor on a site-by-site basis. I've seen sites that treat one time and they look fantastic, and 4 years out, and others where it could be a little, if it was really high thatch or something like that, you may need to do a little spot treatment and clean up. And Claire did a good job talking about any of those sites that you do see some of those coming back. It's important to adaptively manage, because you don't want that to be a seed bank source for the cheatgrass for future invasion. Okay, the real payback, and this is actually a super cool, we've done a lot of webinars, and you can actually go on rejuvera.com and see some of those webinars where we talk about, what is in terms of ranchers and production, what does this mean for ranching operation? And then we dived into the economics and whatnot and return on investment, and it's really cool stuff. I just don't have a lot of time to talk about it. But when you look at overall all the work we've done, we've seen anywhere from a 2 to 10x increase in production in these treated areas. And you can see on that photo on the right where we can selectively take out cheat. It's just like fertilizing your range. It's just amazing to see what comes back, and the natives and the perennials in those systems. Just pretty cool. And then in terms of the benefits on a livestock ranching operation, cheatgrass, cattle graze, and they don't graze with tweezers. So an area like that bottom picture shows with the cheatgrass, that cattle, they're going to move through there, but they're not going to utilize that land. They can't, graze with tweezers. They graze with mouthfuls. They're not going to go into those sites because they can't get out the perennial grass that they need. So you basically lose all production because those cattle can't utilize the grass that's even intermixed within that cheatgrass. And the other really cool thing is that we've shown that if you treat, like on the right-hand side, that grass alone holds a lot more moisture, soil or plant moisture in the vegetation. So you can actually decrease the amount of water that your cattle need to have per day based off of the grass that's holding that water in those areas. So they're gonna, they're not going to overutilize those areas that are infested with cheatgrass. They're not going to overutilize that water source that you have out there on the range. So it's kind of cool when you talk about, they're able to utilize the land better. They're not going to overutilize areas riparian areas and areas that they shouldn't be. And then that vegetation, the desirable perennials, hold a lot more TDN, the digestible nutrients, as well as moisture for the cattle. And you see increased of quality and nutrition on those cattle. Number 2 is increasing native plant diversity and wildlife habitat. This has been super cool to see. And if you can see in these photos, just what comes back is amazing. On the right-hand side, you can see, blanket flower, you can see sweet clover, you can see all kinds of stuff. It's just amazing. And in terms of western wheatgrass and the diversity in the sites. This is one that shows you what you can do when you selectively take out cheatgrass for multiple years. That system is back on a trajectory where we need it to be. Here's another photo of one of the sites that I was out this summer. We'll show you that with comb flower. We have wavy leaf thistle and all kinds of different things coming in. This is a Rejuvera treatment that we did. Was able to take the drone up and take a aerial shot showing you what this looks like on a landscape scale. Again, this is 2 years out, really crisp lines. We're getting that really good second year control and getting rid of that seed bank of that cheatgrass. And you can just see this is, I think, late July, early August. Look how green that still is. It holds that green, and that fire risk is much reduced if you're able to get rid of that cheat. And something interesting, if you're into, wildlife and wildlife restoration, they've actually come out with this article with the Mule Deer Foundation that showed that the number one threat to mule deer is actually cheatgrass. It's not carnivores, development, or even disease. It's cheatgrass, because the fires rip through, they wipe out habitat, they get in their mouth and eyes and cause infections and death. So cheatgrass is a huge impact on populations like mule deer. So we did a whole project on this and quantifying mule deer habitat after we did some of these Rejuva treatments. And like I said, once you get rid of cheat, it's like fertilizing your range, because it's not able to exploit all the moisture nutrients from that shrub anymore. And look what we see. This is average. We did data, and I'm not going to show you anything, but just this photo kind of represents what we saw, where if you didn't treat, you got cheatgrass sucking the life out of that shrub, you get only 2 inches of leader growth, which is the forage for that mule deer over the winter. Where the treated side, we were seeing 10, 12, 14 inches in terms of the longest leader on those shrubs within 1 year. Get rid of cheat and look at the shrubs. Just the health is amazing. And you can see this was actually mountain mahogany in treated and non-treated. And you can see on the left-hand side what that getting rid of the cheatgrass did for those shrubs in terms of mountain mahogany. And then fire breaks is really, in terms of where we're at now with fires and wildfires and protecting infrastructure, protecting, high priority areas. I think it's really important to think about, your customers, as a landowner, how can we strategically place these treatments on a landscape to protect important areas of priority? And that's what we've done on sites like this, where we have a roadside that's highly infested with cheatgrass. If a fire does originate on that roadside, it's not going to carry into this area because we did this fuel break. And we've done this multiple times and showed that, if you were able to eliminate cheatgrass, that fire danger goes way, way down, especially in the hot arid areas like where you guys are at in Montezuma County. Restoring rangelands, that's what this tool provides. And again, selectively take out the cheat and look at that right-hand side, what it can do. It's really, really exciting to have this tool now. This is one that I don't know if I've talked to you guys about this before in other presentations, but again, we've seen time and time again where even noxious broadleaf weeds, the seed bank, they reinfest so often that you get that initial kill, but it comes back via the seed bank. And so I wanted to share a little bit of information on that, because Rejuva has given us that ability now to show if we're able to get rid of that seed bank or control the seedlings the second year and the third year, what does that do to a system? And that's what we're seeing in this photo. On the left-hand side is an area dominated heavily by cheatgrass, common mullein, moth mullein, Dalmatian toadflax. And on the right-hand side, they did a treatment of Telar plus Rejuva. So you had that Telar in there to get the post-emergent control, and then Rejuva is the one that's carrying you through on the longevity. So the cheatgrass is keeping out Dalmatian seedlings and mullein seedlings, and not going to control weeds forever, right? That's just not going to happen. But what we're seeing is it can really heighten that level of control that second, third year, especially on noxious weeds. And I'll show you a little bit of data from some studies that we did on common mullein, Dalmatian, and diffuse snapweed. We actually did Telar plus Tordon on these species, and then we had it with and without Rejuva. And we did the first year control. It all looked great the first year. And then what was interesting is on mullein, look at, if we added Rejuva to Telar plus Tordon, look at that level of control the second year. If you did nothing the second year, you went back down to about 32% control, which is not where we want to be, right? You went from 100% to 32%. Your landowners aren't going to be too happy about that. In terms of Dalmatian, we saw the same thing. Rejuva is really good on Dalmatian toadflax seedlings, and I highly recommend it for that, as well as mullein and diffuse. But again, the same thing. If we were able to add that to the tank to keep the residual seedlings, we saw really good control of that Dalmatian. And then we saw the same thing with diffuse snapweed. You see all the seedlings on the ground, that was non-treated. And you can just see how many of those come back via the seed. We think a lot of times it's coming back via the perennial, but more cases than not, and more that I've seen, you see these seedlings popping up all over the place. And that's really where we need to think about in terms of longevity. What does this do? You think about the tank mix partner you want to use. You need to have an effective, first off, tank mix for the post-emergent, and then Rejuva can help stop those recruitment from the soil seed bank. And that's really what we're looking at with these graphs. And then this is another example showing you what that looks like. So on the left-hand side was a treatment that we did with just Tordon, and then the right-hand side was Tordon plus Rejuva. And the first year it all looked great, and look at the second year, it just came roaring back with just the Tordon. And again, this is, and I've seen this site and site again in studies and trials where when we can add Rejuva, we can really help add that longevity to the mix. This is one that we just got data on, actually over by Craig, Colorado, on halogeton. I think you guys have some halogeton over where you're at, but we're showing that even Telar is a great product on halogeton, but we were seeing moderate control with it. With Rejuva, we got it out before germination, and we did really well on the halogeton with Rejuva at just 5 ounces. So something to think about in terms of a tank mix for halogeton, something like Telar plus Rejuva, or if you get out early enough, because it is an annual, you could go with just Rejuva. This is a, I know Landmark, you're going to say, I don't think I can get Landmark anymore. It's not available. This was in a study just side by side. It was a good one that showed what Landmark alone on bulbous bluegrass and Landmark plus Rejuva gives us. And the brown is all bulbous bluegrass. And this is over by Craig, Colorado, actually, as well. And what we saw was Landmark alone, it didn't give us longevity and it didn't do very well on the bulbous. But when we tank mix Rejuva, the Rejuva actually controls the little bulblet from coming back on bulbous bluegrass. So again, utility in a mix with Rejuva for bulbous, which I think you guys have some of that over where you're at too. This was a interesting one. This was a highly infested area with peatgrass, mullein, and Dalmatian. And you can see that on the right-hand side, which was not treated. And on the left-hand side, we actually went out with Rejuva plus Telar. And the idea was to get Telar to get the post-emergent control again, and Rejuva to give the longevity. And you can see 2 years out what that looks like. You know, the natives came back great. We got really good control of the target weeds, and we were setting that back towards that trajectory of not getting those seeds coming back. And I have a few slides, just one on Telar, and then I was going to talk on foxtail barley really quick. Being with, you know, having this role for the past few years, I've been looking and evaluating different mixes and different things for noxious weed treatments. And a lot of times Telar has been seen as kind of an additive to other treatments. So we got to go, you know, different products with Telar. It's never been looked at by itself. And I've been doing a lot of research, and we've been looking at this more. And in terms of tree safety and some of those ideas, shrub safety, Telar does a fantastic job. And these are some of my recommendations on all the different species that this tool actually provides control on. And it's fantastic on your white top, all the thistles. You can go, you know, hound's tongue, Dalmatian toadflax, curly dock. I do recommend with yellow toadflax to add Tordon to that mix. But halogeton, mullein. If you're looking for something else that's a little more tree safe on noxious weeds that you want to add to Rejuva, Telar does a really fantastic job on a lot of these species. And I'm happy if you reach out, I can give you some of this information or send you this slide as well. But 1 to 1.5 ounces is something that I'd recommend you think about adding to your toolbox. And then I get a lot of calls, like Claire said, on foxtail barley. That is one that's just like, man, there's not many things out there that work on it. The work I've done and the work I've seen and talked to folks, there's 3 options. You got the option of glyphosate, non-selective, which is going to eliminate a lot of your desirables, which is not preferable, right? Plateau at a high rate, 10 to 12 ounces. That's also going to do a lot of damage on your forage grasses. And the third option is this Lambient. And this is one that our group has had for several years now. And we got it from the crop side of the division, Olympus, that's what it was called. And we've been doing actually internal trials on this and looking at it, because I've heard success stories with Lambient. I haven't personally used it or done this, but this is a case study actually from Wyoming, and the data that we're conducting this year supports what this is telling us. But look at the control with Lambient at 1.2 ounces. It did a really good job on foxtail, and we're seeing that to get the best control on foxtail, you got to go out in the early spring when it's about 2 to 3 inches tall. And sometimes it does take multiple applications, so 1 to 2 years, and it can impact your forage production, especially on some of those high production areas for a season. But it seems like they come back pretty well at your desirables, and we can get a pretty good level of foxtail kill with Lambient at 1.2 ounces. So just something to think about, add to your toolbox if foxtail is something that is the bane of your existence, because man, it's a tough one to control, and there's not many options out there that work on it. So in summary, really excited to be able to talk about this new Rejuva product, something we've been working on for a long time, and it's exciting that now you guys can get your hands on it. We're getting multi-year control of annual grass and broadleaf weeds. We can reduce fine fuels and fire danger. So how can you strategically use this for fire breaks and things like that? Think about how you can utilize that. Restoring native plant communities, ecosystems, increase forage quality and yield. So how can we better allow our cattle to utilize the land, because they can't graze with tweezers. They can't get in there if there's cheatgrass. How can we allow them to better utilize the whole landscape? Improve livestock efficiency, like I just said, and performance. And then in terms of ROI, please go to rejuver.com if you want to hear one of the webinars that we've been doing. But the ROI for a rancher is right around 2.5 years, and the return is really high on investing in rangeland restoration with a tool like this. So highly recommend you check that out. And that's all I have, Bonnie. And I'm happy to take any questions if you guys have any.
I know Walt has a question. I'm coming.
All right, Walt.
Hi, Derek. In your first, you had talked about
checking.
It's cutting out, Bonnie.
Okay, Derek, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
All right, thanks. In your first talk, you talked about, showed a slide on how glyphosate works. And then you showed that it hits the ground, and I may have misunderstood this, but it looked like you said it moves through the soil and can attach to the root and also moves through the leaves. Is that correct?
Yeah, I might have misspoken. So it'll move through the leaf, get absorbed, and then translocated to the roots. But as soon as it hits soil, it binds to the soil, and it's not going to move from there. It just degrades rapidly via microbes. So that's basically, you can think of it as soon as it hits that soil, it's inactivated and it's broken down into the nitrogen, oxygen, carbon type things. But the way it gets to the roots is through the absorption in the leaves, and then it gets translocated down.
Okay, that's how I thought it understood that.
Yep.
Just a little bit on applying the rejuvenate, just cleaning up. You told us to try and clean up our production fields as best we could, but if you're putting on a rangeland, you don't really have that option. And it couldn't get bound up in all the plant material that's on the surface.
Yeah, so your question is, how do you get Rejuver to the soil when there's like plant litter and stuff? Is that where you're at?
Correct.
Yeah, so really what we've done trials where there's little thatch, where there's 2-3 inches of thatch. And really the important thing is getting it out early if you're going with just the straight Rejuvra. So like I talked about, June, July is a great time to go with just Rejuvra. And it's another great time to do it if you're doing broadleaf tank mixes as well, because you can get that broadleaf control. But that allows you a good 1 to 2 months, especially in your guys' arid country. You don't know when that moisture is going to occur. So get it out early with Rejuvra. Or what I actually recommend more in those very arid areas is wait till that August, September, October timeframe and add Plateau. So Plateau is going to get to the soil, it's good at what it does. It gets to the soil easy, and it can give you that initial control that you need while the Rejuvra is getting to the soil via, rainfall and whatnot. So, and Rejuvra is going to give you that 2, 3, 4 years control, and Plateau can just give you that initial kick to help until that Rejuvra is in the soil and activated by rainfall. So there's 2 options. Get out early with Rejuvra alone so you get some moisture, but in a lot of areas you guys don't get a lot of moisture. That's where I really like that Plateau combo. And in arid areas, that combo looks really good. And your window is like 3 months, August through October. You can go out with 5 ounces plus 5 ounces.
The Rejuvra is on, say, a grass leaf, and it can sit there for 2 months, and then a rain comes along, wash it off the grass leaf into the soil.
Yep. And it'll sit on that thatch. It'll sit on you get about 10% with just the application to the soil. But yeah, the rest of that is sitting on the top of the soil, and you need that rain event to get it down. Yep.
Anybody else question? Okay. Thank you, Derek. We'll see you after lunch. Oh, wait, Hang on. Hey. Can't hear you without the microphone. Hang on. Talk close.
So does it work as well with jointed goat grass?
Yeah, it does. It does a great job. Yeah, I've seen several operational treatments, and we've done studies. And if you send me an email, or I can send you some of that data, but yeah, it's looking really good on jointed. I'd say it's very similar to cheatgrass from what I've seen.
Copy that. Thank you, Derek. Have
Thanks,
a good lunch. If you were here, you could have our delicious lunch.
I know. I wish I could. I saw that on the agenda. Golly.